question, I think it'll be important to review what are the green card options. So there are different pathways to green card. There's EB1, there's EB2, EB3, and EB5 that pretty much most employer-based use. So EB1 is the extraordinary ability category, and that has a set criteria. And then between EB2, there's two different processes. One is PERM, which is employer dependent, which is the employer has to do their part, and they have to make sure that you did not displace any qualified American citizen to get the job, and your pay is not, basically the company is not paying you less because you are a foreign citizen. So the PERM process has to be initiated by the employer, and the fees has to be paid by the employer. So there are several stages in the PERM process. The first one is prevailing wage determination, which basically has to be given by the Department of Labor for someone, say an internal medicine physician practicing in Chicago. What is the prevailing wage for that specialty in that city, to make sure that your pay is higher than the prevailing wage for that specialty. That process takes anywhere from 3 to 5 months. Second step is recruitment. Recruitment basically means the employer has to post a job ad, and the job ad has to be open for a minimum of 30 days, and it has to be published in newspapers, web links, and then job boards, national job boards. And if anyone applies to that job in that period, the employer has to interview them, and make sure that if they are eligible, then the green card process cannot proceed. If they are ineligible for the job, then they basically say you are the only qualified candidate who applied for the job. So then it moves on to the PERM filing stage. Again, PERM filing is through the Department of Labor again, and that takes anywhere from 3 to 4 months at this time. So so that is the usual process. Once that PERM approval happens, then they will file something called I-140, which is the document that basically for your green card, that step is very important. Is the I-140 stage. If you go by what's called physician national interest waiver, which is basically you're saying I will work in an underserved area for a total of 5 years, you can pretty much skip the whole first step as long as you meet certain criteria. First and foremost is you need a job contract, which should be 5 years, and you should agree to work 40 hours per week in an underserved area as defined by HPSA or MUA. And as long as you meet those criteria, your employer will has to give a letter stating why it's important for you to work in that community. There's a need for certain specialty, and then they have to send those documents to the State Department, which handles NIW applications. So the NIW, the state has to give an NIW support letter, basically stating you are working in an underserved area, and it is of national interest that you should be granted a green card because you are serving American citizens in an underserved area or a medically underserved population. Once that letter is obtained, then your attorney will file something called the I-140, and usually this first step can be done anywhere from 2 to 3 months, thereby skipping the whole detailed PERM filing process. But the PNIW will basically mean you have to work in an underserved area for a total of 5 years to be eligible for a green card. Versus with the PERM process, even though it takes a long time, if you are from any country other than India or China, and you finish your 3-year waiver, you can get a green card right away if you have a PERM process. Versus with the PNIW, you have to wait 5 years. With EB1 pathway, which does not have anything to do with the employer, if it's EB1A category, which is if you have a lot of publication citations and your work is of international importance, and you work with an experienced EB1 attorney who can prepare those documents to justify that you are an extraordinary ability person, you can file EB1 at any time based on your CV, your citations, publications, and so forth. And that will, if that gets approved, you get an I-140 through your EB1. At the end of the day, you need an I-140 from any different pathway. Whichever pathway, as long as you satisfy all the requirements, you can get through. It's important to note that For physician national interest waiver, if you are on a J1 training, your training years will not be counted towards the 5 years. So your physician national interest waiver period starts right at the point where you start your waiver job. So from that point, it has to be 5 years. PERM process, although it takes about a year to complete, you can't get your green card until you finish the 3 years of the waiver. EB1 is the same. You can get your EB1 approved while you're doing a J1 waiver, but you cannot get a green card until you finish the waiver. So category called EB1B is a separate employer file green card process. This is again comes out in the EB1 category, but there are certain requirements that's different from EB1A, which is self-petition. So for EB1B, extraordinary professor or researcher category, one has to be in a tenure track and has to be an internationally recognized physician and should have 3 years of teaching or research experience. The university will file the green card paperwork, and because it's usually filed by the university, the approval rate for this category is very high, and this is something that can be negotiated when someone searches for a waiver job. So ultimately, regardless of which pathway you choose, EB1 or EB2, and you will have an I-140 through any of these pathways. I-485 is called the Adjustment of Status Application. That is the form to submit to eventually get green card when you have no other requirements that are pending, such as finishing waiver, and so forth. However, there's one advantage of physician national interest waiver that none of the other categories have, is that if you get an I-140 through a physician national interest waiver and your priority date is current for your country, you can file for I-485 even if you did not finish your 3-year waiver requirement. This will make sure you and your spouse will get an employment authorization document that mainly it will help your spouse. They can work for any employer, and it also makes your travel process easier, but you still have to finish your 5 years to get the green card. Versus with the PERM pathway, if you're from any country other than India or China, after 3 years, you can file for green card and get it by the 4th year. So there's one difference between the two categories. So I'm going to summarize all the different pathways and go one by one. So EB1A, which is extraordinary ability category. The pros are that it is self-sponsored category. There's no need for employment contract. Yeah, the I-140 is a direct filing. And it can be filed during training, and the I-140 can be filed under premium processing. The disadvantages are that you need a reasonably strong CV and an experienced attorney support to file EB1 pathway. And it is self-pay, so it can cost anywhere around $10,000 to complete the whole process. It can be rejected by the reviewer if they find that your application does not merit qualifications under the EB1 category, which is 3 out of the 10 points that I will put it in the next slide. And you cannot file I-485 until you complete the waiver requirements if you are a J1 waiver candidate. So for EB1, there are 10 different categories that you could potentially qualify. You need to qualify for at least 3 out of the 10 to be eligible to apply for EB1. This is available in USCIS website that you can go through in detail. Next, moving on, EB1B pathway is outstanding professor or researcher pathway. Again, the pros are that it's university sponsored, it has a very high acceptance rate, direct I-140 filing, and can be filed under premium processing. The negative point is that it has more stringent requirements from the university standpoint. They don't file it for every candidate. You need to be in a tenure track, which is a big deal, because that basically means you have a job for life, which only very few select candidates can get a tenure track. Protected research time is not allowed under Conduct 30 waiver, which limits job options for an outstanding professor or researcher category. And again, you cannot file I-485 until you finish the 3-year waiver requirement, if that is required on your CV. Moving on, EB2 PERM pathway. The pros are that there's no extraordinary requirements. Anyone can apply in this as long as you finish the residency and fellowship. The employer pays the fees associated with it. The priority dates for this pathway are current for most countries, And so you should be able to file I-485 right away if you're a H1 candidate, or immediately after waiver if you are in a J1 waiver. And I-140 can be filed as premium processing. The negatives is that you have to negotiate with the employer for timely filing and process. Process could take anywhere from 9 to 12 months, and you cannot file I-485 until you finish the waiver pathway. Under EB2 Physician National Interest Waiver Pathway, the advantages are that there's no dependence on the employer, and you can skip the PERM processing, and direct I-140 filing can be done through this pathway. Can also file I-485, as I mentioned earlier. Only exception would be countries India and China, whose EB2 dates are not current. The negative is that you have to complete your 5 years service in an underserved area. Flex waiver candidates are not eligible to apply for Physician National Interest Waiver, and the final green card will be given only after you finish the 5 years. Candidate pays the fees, which can cost anywhere around $4,000, and it also is dependent on the state health department giving you a support letter for this application that might delay the filing in different states. Possibly negotiate the timeline for the PERM application. Maybe ask them if they can file, within a month of you starting. Some employers will only start the process 1 year after you finish your job. If that's not acceptable to you, that's something you can negotiate. But your negotiating power is only as much as how much need they have. If they can fill the job, if they have 4 waiver applicants sitting, waiting for the job contract, your negotiating power is going to be 0. So if you ask more than what the other candidates are asking, they'll just go with the other candidate. So remember, if the employers have difficulty hiring, they don't like the applicants to leave after 3 years. So they could put in extra contingencies to make your process of finishing your waiver to moving on to another job difficult. So there's a lot of gray areas here. Some things can be negotiated, some things are institutional policies and cannot be negotiated. If you found this video useful, like this video and also subscribe to my YouTube channel for more such videos pertaining to physicians, residents, and fellows. Also press the bell icon for instant notifications when my next video uploads to my channel.